really
All right.
quickly, just to make sure.
Yep. We're testing the sound to make sure everything's coming through nice and clear.
Test, test, test. I can hear
Test,
you
test,
good.
test. Yes, I can hear you as well. Check if you can.
Okay, perfect.
Alrighty.
All right, welcome to week 4 of the 2021 Spring Gauntlet, the anime podcast. We're at issue number 5. My name is Manatsu, one of your hosts, and with me today, and always, is John.
Alrighty. Let's check out this week. This week had some good highs and some good lows. Or some, I guess, some notable lows, at least from my perspective. So, yeah, let's take a dive in and see how it goes.
Yeah, with that, we'll start off at number 1. And with number 1, we have those Snow White notes again. I gave a score of 6.8. You gave a score of 9, which is your high score for this week, for a rolling average of 7.66.
Yeah. This was, I thought it was just like it was really straightforward. Like there was nothing super complex about the episode, but I thought it was just like really emotionally resonant. Like the whole, um, I think it was, the whole. Here's the song that my grandpa had, and he has this whole dream of just being like, oh, like I can't play it as perfectly as a grandpa can, and so I have to kind of just make my own version, and he finally plays it in front of the grandma, and she actually ends up like kind of telling him just like, oh, this wasn't the sound that I heard, and he thought that it's just like, oh, like damn, I failed because like I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
give up to my grandpa's standards. She goes, no, like in fact, like it was like his voice was just the voice that she heard from his grandpa's shamisen was just so much more simple, and he was just like a young guy who just wanted to just play music. And so she like it was I thought that the I don't know. I definitely shed a tear towards the end there, and I was just like, damn,
Oh,
like
okay.
yeah. I was like,
Okay.
okay, shit. I was like, okay, all right. Like this is some pretty nice stuff. I think like it's very simple. I'll give it that. It's I think it's very simplistic, but I think that it executed like the like kind of like and the heart and music connection. I think it did like a really good job with that, and so I think this is just an example of like simple equals well done. Was kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, so I give it a 6.8. I thought the emotion of Piaf was well done.
Yeah,
This is essentially the first arc of the season under wraps. I
yeah,
would call it a first season
mm-hmm.
because, arc, because the whole idea was he was trying to replicate the song, right? Or how
Yeah,
can he do such a thing?
mm-hmm.
And to figure out that it's, oh, it's more of where I am in my journey. I was like,
Yeah,
okay, good. Because I didn't want the entire show just to be about this singular song
yeah,
because then it would be a
mm-hmm.
little bit too
Dramatic.
monotonous. So
Yeah,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
yeah,
for no really good reasons. So I'm
yeah,
glad that they tied it up, and we'll see like what happens next.
yeah. For sure. Yeah, and on the topic of other super slam dunk episodes, we have Vivi Floyd's Eye Song. It came in at number 2. Manatsu gave it a score of 7.3, and I gave it a score of 9 with a rolling average of 7.6. Man, this was one of those episodes where I felt like it just like had this is like almost, in my opinion, like a perfect anime episode. Like I thought it was just like, oh man, like I thought it was really really it was a nice balance of kind of like the philosophical treatise that they kind of go on throughout the show. And yeah, like like the emotional punch, especially I felt like towards the end, where Elise's wait, I forget the names. The host AI's twin sister, like where like her memory gets
Mm-hmm.
reset, and
Beth.
then they do that Beth, yeah, and they do that whole singing, and that whole singing sequence. I thought that was just like the perfect level of kind of like emotional, I don't know, like emotional evocation, and I was like, yo, like that's some. I was like, damn, like this is. It's like it's. I thought it was just like a perfect amount of like, oh, like like continuing forward with the plot, and like kind of goes like back to the show theme, and like kind of gets you thinking there too, and then like also I felt like it just like pulled at the heartstrings also really well, and yeah, like damn, like I thought this was just like a fantastic, absolutely fantastic episode.
Yeah. So I thought so, and I think this might be a recurring theme, at least for
Yeah.
me, with the rest of the shows that's
Mm-hmm.
available. Uh, the show introduced a new character slash something new, and it resolved also at the end of the episode. In this case, the addition of a twin sister, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was new information, and unlike the other shows that we'll be talking about later, this one I thought it felt satisfying the way it
Yeah.
ended. Um,
Mm-hmm.
even though it was just really abrupt that they started something new. I think it sets up a good pace, and I think the way they're doing the arcs is good too, right? They're doing time skips to kind of show you like how
Yeah.
AI kind of progresses, and it signifies the viewer, oh, we're done with this arc. The Bay Area is shutting down. We're gonna wait for the next arc.
Yeah.
I also want to point out that I think the audio is very top notch, and both the singing and the
Yeah.
just the sound effects in general when they fight is
Yeah.
also mesmerizing.
Yeah, like I felt like this one was one too where like even if like action technically isn't the focus, I will personally say from what we've seen, it is one of the more satisfying action sequences out of the shows that we are reviewing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like
Yeah.
definitely executed like really well, and then yeah, I think like it's just it's like an entire package come together. Like I think like to contrast whatchamacallit, those Snow White notes, like I felt like this was an episode where like they really like knocked a lot of balls like off, like like they like just hit everything like right on the dot, like it's just like perfect like hits, like yeah, I mean I felt like it just like had like a little bit of everything, and it wrapped up very nicely. And yeah, I mean this is like it's constantly it's always has been top two for a reason. And yeah, I like just absolutely can't wait to go forward just to continue to watch it. I thought it was just really touching and just yeah, like superbly done. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and we have no idea what the next arc is going to be about, right?
Yeah,
It's always
exactly.
open-ended because
This is
there's a time skip.
yeah, exactly. And I feel like personally, I mean we don't know for sure, but like this also kind of feels kind of like a slight. I mean I know I can't really call it an arc because like we were only in this setting for what 2 episodes.
2 episodes.
Like
Yeah.
two-ish episodes, but yeah, it did feel like kind of like a little mini story that wrapped up, and more, and I think like from like kind of like a character development standpoint too, at the end when Vivi goes, oh, like I'm so jealous, right, because like they're singing, right, and they've like provided joy to and comfort to those people, and it's like you kind of like get that little tiny bit of Vivi's development also wrapped up, and I was just like, damn, like this is pretty, it's like it's very nicely done. Yeah, I don't know. That's just like the best way I can describe it. It's just really nicely done.
Yeah,
like, yeah. So that's Vivi. And at number 3, we have 86. Coming in at staying at number 3. Manatsu gave it a score of 7.3. I gave it a score of 7 with the rolling average now 7.04.
Yeah. So this one was a great episode. It highlighted a lot of different things. I mean, there was no action at all for this episode. I think that was fine. I realized I liked the time that they spent kind of differentiating the main character. I can't even think of her name, but
yeah,
and the
Whitey.
other people from from her society.
Yeah.
So funny enough, I have the name here of her friend. Her friend's name is Penrose.
Okay.
And I thought it was a great way to showcase the different perspectives that people have on the 86, right?
Yeah.
So the main character, because of her father, and then we kind of revealed in this episode that because of her father, she has compassion for the people of the 86.
Yeah.
And Penrose is more.
It's kind of like complicit, right? It's just very complicit. It's
yeah,
kinda...
she's a bit cynic about everything, right?
Yeah.
The idea of like, yeah, you can show them empathy and whatnot, but at the end of the day, you're not gonna meet them. You don't know what they look at, so why even bother?
Yeah, I thought like it was just a nice snippet in the conversation, but the part where she talks about like, oh, here's like like our little thing of fun, and like it's nice for other people, but like I can't send it to other people, so why are we supposed to not enjoy it, right? And it's just like, and it's a really nice picture, kind of like it is kind of like almost like an implicit acceptance of just kind of like this is the way things are, so why like reinvent the wheel, why break the wheel, right? And then meanwhile for Whitey for her, like it's she has now the story now shows us exactly why she's seemingly gives a lot more care about, conflict and the loss that comes along with it, right? In comparison to
Yeah.
some of her compatriots, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're getting a perspective of her friend,
Mhm.
because it's a bit more nuanced. I think if it was like a enemy commander that was like, yeah, screw them, whatever. It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
whatever. But
Hmm.
because it's her friend that's sharing this
Yeah.
different perspective, I think it's good.
Yeah, I definitely think like this was an episode where I think it sure, like, there wasn't any action that happened, but I think that it did a good job in giving us a lot more character depth. And I think that for shows, especially in my opinion, for shows that kind of have a slightly more generic premise and that type of stuff, like, this is the type of stuff that ends up separating out these shows from just, forgettable, extremely formulaic things, right? It's like you can have like emotional gut punches, like for example the previous episode, right? Like it had like an amazing
Mm-hmm.
like emotional moments towards the end. I do think that was crafted through a little bit more nuanced exploration of emotions. But if you were solely just relying on those, like, like as much crap as you want to give some of these YA dystopian stories, like a lot of them have like, incredibly cool moments, or, like big
Yeah.
moments. But like what really, in my opinion, what gives this show a lot of potential is, once again, yeah, like it's exploring a lot more nuance slash like just like going deeper into the characters earlier on into the series too. The earlier you do it, the more weight kind of like some of the actions that happen later will be. And so like, like it's promising for me to see that like they're kind of addressing this stuff pretty early, and they're not, and they weren't afraid of, like taking up an episode just to make sure they kind of get like the fundamentals of storytelling, so to speak, down
Yeah,
properly.
and I mean they kind of earn it because they
Yeah.
did 2 episodes in a
Yeah.
row of action,
Hmm.
so it's like, okay,
Yeah.
they should slow things down.
Yeah. And so okay, pretty good. Alrighty, at number 4 we have Odd Taxi. At staying at number 4, Anatsu gave it a score of 6.3, and I gave it a score of 7, which gives it a rolling average of 6.41. This was one of those really. I'll admit that this is one of a really bizarre episode. I think
Mm-hmm.
just by normal anime standards, you literally essentially had a window into stream of consciousness for over 90% of the episode. On essentially this guy's gotcha addiction, and it is. I thought it was like, it was one of those things where like I felt like it was like, okay, you. I don't know. To be fair, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if a lot of other animes have attempted this, but it seemed like a pretty bold, like, I guess like directing choice to make, to decide to like put in a whole
Yeah.
episode and just be like, this is just gonna, I want you to stream of consciousness and like tell me exactly how, like, just like this guy literally went so far back in the stream of consciousness. He started with like the gotcha slash like, rare collecting addiction of when he was super young, like in
Yeah.
elementary school, about erasers. And literally you go through the progression of how he went and thought about that mentality of, oh, like erasers are the only way we could show off, all the way into spiraling it into gotcha addiction, right? And like it's just, I'm just gonna be honest, like very little event stuff happens, right? It's just literally stream of consciousness from beginning almost all the way to the end. And I thought that it was really enjoyable for me to watch, because I think that it was executed well enough to the point where it was entertaining for me to kind of see this spiraling. I think they did the spiraling, like the pacing of the narrator and that type of stuff. I think it was done like well enough. Yeah, I will say that, like it does kind of run the risk of potentially, I guess, kind of at times being a little bit draggy, right? And like kind of like slow, just like, of him just talking through some of that stuff. But I will give it some credit and say that, like, oh yeah, like the forking away from conventional storytelling, of kind of like, here's events, instead of doing that, focusing on kind of like the inner philosophical development. I thought it was done pretty well.
Yeah, I agree that it was a bold choice
Yeah.
in taking an episode to talk about the origin story of a very minor side
Yeah.
character.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said earlier, a lot of the episodes this week, for whatever reason, introduce a new character and
Yeah.
try to tie it in the main story at the end. By the end,
Mm-hmm.
and this one was, I mean, I it was able the whole origin story. I was
Yeah.
able to be sucked in.
Yeah.
I didn't like the character. If anything,
Yes. Yeah. It like annoyed the
they
shit
did a
out of me.
good
Yeah.
job. Yeah, they did a good job in making me as a viewer dislike that character a
Yeah.
lot. I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
I'm
No.
so annoyed by his choices and what he
Yeah.
did. And then we see the connection and the scene where they show where the taxi driver,
Yeah.
runs really fast and then the guy
Yeah.
drops the phone. That was a scene that was
Yeah. It
shown
was there.
either last
Yeah.
episode or 2 episodes ago, right? And
Yeah.
that's how
Mm-hmm.
everything connects.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see that just like a random 2 second shot
Yeah.
is expounded upon with a full origin story. Now I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I need to go back and see what other small, tiny
Yeah.
frames appeared because they might be actually really important later on.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that like even though like for a mystery show, right, to take out an almost like an entire episode to not advance really the mystery and just kind of go with this, I will say that it I think it was done well enough to the point where yeah, it's like you said, right? Like I'm like incentivized to actually go back and try to see if there's other little snippets that I want to be able to kind of like pick up and be like, ooh, like this will feed into the mystery later or something like that, right? Like
Yeah.
I want to be able to see that, so it's just like, oh come on, like yeah. And so I'm definitely really intrigued by that. Yeah, and like you identified, man, does this episode does do a good job of just making me like just disdain the shit out of this guy. Just like yeah, it's just
Oh yeah,
so
big
annoying. I'm just like, dude, like what a little yeah. But I think like that's like it's like the Joffrey example in Game of Thrones where people are just like, dude, I hate this character so much. It's like yeah, then that's a character well done, right?
And
It's
they
like
fulfilled, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it's like this is a character
So,
well done. Yeah.
and then the episode ends with a cliffhanger with the gun, and so
Yeah.
now it's like anything goes. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens to the main character.
Exactly. Alrighty, and at number 5, we have Koikomo. It raised up one spot. Manasa gave it a score of 5.8, and I gave it a score of 7. I think that it's one of the shows where even up to right now, I'm still gonna stick with my original statement of like I kind of think the premise is kind of and like it's pretty uncomfortable. But I will say that like just with that put into consideration, I think it does good enough of a job at just exploring kind of social dynamics, which is supposed to be the focus of a slice of life, right? Like I still think
Yeah.
that like the writing is solid enough to the point where like I am able to be entertained by kind of following like okay like this person kind of feels this way about something and this person feels that way about something. I think in general there's nothing super outstanding about it, but this show does continue to kind of surprise me. I think that like at least just number one, I don't think any of the writing is just like so out of left field that it just like breaks my immersion. Like I think that there are a couple shows later that we will talk about where I will point out this sin, I suppose, like where it just like bugs the crap out of me. Like this show, like it hasn't happened yet, and even though the premise is kind of weird, like I still think that like all the developments, whether it's story or just kind of character developments, are interesting enough for me to kind of just like be like, oh, you know what, like that was satisfying to watch. It didn't feel bored. Kind of want to see where it goes next. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's the same where it's like, oh, if you just made the character a college student, the whole ickiness would just
Yeah.
be gone. It makes the show rather a bit sweeter, with the interactions between all the characters. But
Yeah.
I get a 5.8, so I didn't give it as high of a score before.
Okay.
Because I don't think there was much character development to begin with, right? It was just
Yeah.
exchanging a gift, so it's like okay,
Yeah.
whatever. Animation is still well done.
Yeah.
Writing is still like not bad at all. Like
Yeah.
one of the better voice acting,
Yeah.
in my opinion, of all the shows. So
Yeah.
just solid, not
Yeah.
bad. I
Yeah.
want to say it's excellent, but still
Yeah,
good enough for
exactly.
number 5.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like I don't think that there was anything particularly outstanding. I would argue, besides episode, I think which was the episode where she kind of like realizes she also might like him too. Was that episode two
The
or
ending of
three?
the second.
Yeah,
one.
the ending of the second one. I like think outside of that moment, there's generally like there hasn't been like a super outstanding moment to where I was just like, oh crap, like nice or something like that. Like it isn't super outstanding, but I do think that it is well executed enough to the point where for a slice of life, it's like it kind of does its job and like you want to keep watching. It's just like it's decent.
Exactly.
Alrighty. And at number 6, we have Mars Red. Dropped one spot. And Atsu gave it a score of 4.8, and I gave it a score of 6, which makes the rolling average 5.98. I think that It continues to be a very over dramatic show. I think that
Yep.
it's like it's a very like like it's just like you have the almost kind of like the K drama esque feel when you watch the show, just like dude, like everything's just like cranked up like crazy. But I think that it's, I don't know if it's just the plot. I think the plot's still intriguing enough for me to the point where I'm like, oh hey, like it's decent, and it's almost like because of the thematic elements. Like for example, the vampire on the left of the poster, where he has that whole brush
The mask
with, yeah, the mask guy. He has that whole brush with, the local
prostitute.
working girl. And yeah, like it's like it's so drama. Like it's just like first of all, like it still like feels extremely drama heavy. Where it's just like, dude, like holy, it's so dramatic. Like my goodness, but like it's like moments like that where I think maybe it's just a thing where like you just kind of know that the show's already going to be a little bit hammed up in terms of that type of stuff, and if you like watch it with that type of a mindset, like at least for me personally, I was kind of able to see that, be like, oh, I like that. Like I still think it was like
It's interesting because
decent. Yeah.
I can't see it with that view, which is why my score for the
Okay.
show has been very low for the most part.
Okay.
But with, and we'll discuss it in another show.
Okay.
I'll be talking about another show in another lens.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right, yeah, and so like I think the reason my scores maybe have been a little bit higher for this one is precisely because I'm kind of like almost like it's like a extra lens of suspension of disbelief type of thing, where I'm like, okay, like with this into play, like I still think blah blah, but yeah, I think that the plot's like it's like good enough to kind of be like, oh hey, like I want to kind of see what happens next, but yeah, I mean, just as a forewarning for those of you who are a little bit allergic to over dramedy stuff, like this one definitely hams it up like a lot. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I just
just
think the pacing for the show was so weird. It just didn't make sense to me. Like
okay.
his interaction with the prostitute, like
Yeah.
he meets her mostly for because he needs the
Yeah.
window for a
Mm-hmm.
vantage point.
Yeah.
And then the whole interaction about, oh yeah, return this pin. And literally 5 minutes later, he's back and then she's dead. I'm like, I don't have any
Yeah.
investment in this character or their
Mm-hmm.
relationship. I don't understand why so I understand they sent the soldier in because he was the
Yeah.
weakest one.
Yes. Yeah.
But why are you okay with sending a soldier who doesn't even know how to communicate back? Like it's like
Okay.
forced conflict that I don't think is earned,
Okay.
in my opinion. And so
Yeah.
this whole episode, I mean, this episode specific, which is really weird to me. It's like
Okay.
I have no idea what they're going for, why things are going so fast.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, the theme of this week's episodes for me were introducing new characters and then finishing them off at the end of the day. So this is
Yeah.
one where it's like, oh, introduce
Yeah.
a character, 5 minutes later dies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
And you're kind of
I
like,
guess
okay. Yeah.
I don't feel anything. I guess.
Yeah. Fair enough. Alrighty. And at number 7 we have Shadow's House. Manassas gave it a score of 5.8. I gave it a score of 5, brings a rolling average to 5.79.
Yeah. So Shadow's House is an interesting one because I think like a week, maybe last week, I was
Okay.
thinking, wow, we scored a show pretty high, right? It's always in the top
Yeah.
eight, but
Mm-hmm.
nothing big has really happened,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of minor interactions here.
Yeah.
A lot of the allure of this show is learning about the shadows
Mm-hmm.
and what exactly the family is about.
Mm-hmm.
And this episode is no exception, right?
Yeah.
We learned a little bit more about the shadow.
Yeah.
We learned a little bit more about the hierarchy with the star bearer, or whatever her name is. So the most intriguing part for me is, and it only happened for a few seconds, but we saw the interactions for a few seconds of the other dolls and their shadows.
Oh
I think
yeah.
like
Yeah.
2, 3 seconds
It
for
was
each one.
it was really short, but
Yeah, but I really enjoyed that, and I wanted to see more of that. But
yeah.
could be an explanation why they don't want to give us more insight on that.
Yeah, I think a perfect way to kind of describe my feelings around this episode, to give, I guess, the listeners slash viewers a little bit of window into our process. Like, I'm not sure exactly when this episode drops relatively compared to the other ones, but I know this one ends up usually being one of the last ones that I watch. And it's not because it's not like, oh, I want to save the best for last. And it's not like, oh, I just hate this show, I don't want to watch it. But it is one of those shows where, like, it's like, it feels like you're stepping into something where you know it's going to be a lot because things happen relatively slowly and you kind of have to
Hmm.
like spend a lot of mental energy to like kind of all put it together and stuff like that. And so it is one of those shows where like I'm hoping that like all this kind of very gradular build up, it's like, you know, what you pointed out earlier, it's like not too many like interesting things happen, but there's still a lot of
Yeah.
things that happen and you kind of have to all piece it together. Like that's kind of like almost like the perfect way to describe this show right now. It's just like there's just so many like little puzzle pieces. Like this is like if I had to describe any show like a jigsaw like puzzle that you had to put together, this one would be that, right? And I think that it's
Yeah.
kind of, and it's like a, I feel like the reason that's almost just like such a perfect encapsulation of kind of like how I feel about the show. It's just like there's just so many little things here and there where like I'm really hoping, right? It's like I hope the picture that I get at the end of this jigsaw puzzle is gonna be really nice, right? But it
Yeah.
does feel very jigsawsy, and like to give it credit, there are many pieces. There's always some pieces that are here and there, and it makes you kind of interested to want to watch. But at the same time, like at least for me personally, just as a viewer, like I know that it's a little bit more like I have to give it more mental energy to kind of all put it together because it doesn't flow as fluidly or excitedly, I suppose, as some of the other
Yep.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it will need to show some of that progress soon,
Yeah.
because we're coming to the point, like we're almost there at the midway point
Yeah.
where a lot of the shows uh, already have good stuff and are rolling,
Yeah.
so it needs to kind of convert that. I
Yeah.
like whenever I think about the mystery drama
Yeah.
genre,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot about Steins Gate because
Yeah.
the
Mm-hmm.
first episode of Steins Gate was huge, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
but episodes 2 to like 7 maybe is like kind of slow, like
Yeah.
really
Mm-hmm.
really slow.
Yeah. Definitely.
But if you're willing, if they can catch your attention for just
For those
another
episodes,
week,
right? Yeah.
eventually it'll pay off.
Yeah, exactly right. Like I think that like Steins Gate being the example of like okay, first you had a really big grand premise to buy the viewer in, right? You know, ring the viewer in, and then like it was just to be honest, like you know the pacing was kind of like meh, but if you
Yeah.
can manage to get it there and like the payoff ends up being quite enormous, right? And then you see like oh all this build over from episode 2 to 7, like it ended up being like quite nice. Like I'm hoping that Shadow's House is going to be able to kind of replicate that type of feel. So yeah,
Yeah.
fingers crossed for this show's future. And at the last of our top of the list is Tokyo Revengers.
Yeah, it is the first time we have a new show on the
Yeah,
top eight.
exactly. Minatsu gave it a score of 5.8. I gave it a score of 6, which gives it a rolling average of 5.73. Yeah, this episode in particular, I think it was a little bit more cheesy, I will say,
Yeah.
compared to some of the
Hmm.
previous ones, but I think that in the context of the story, the cheesiness ended up in more emotional depth,
Hmm.
which is first of all like I will give this show plenty of credit. There is a lot of emotional depth that's like being generated in the show, I think, just kind of due to the nature of the premise and the fact that they were still able to kind of add another layer onto that. To me, still like you know, is a W in my book. Even though yes, you know, it was quite a little quite significantly more cheesier than some of the other episodes. Like I will say that like yeah, I still think that you know executed in the end. And yeah, this show at the beginning it was kind of like a level of uncertainty of like oh cool premise, but I'm not sure how this is gonna go. I would not be surprised if this one kind of ends up being on the top of our list for like quite a while, just
Yes.
because yeah, like I think that they're doing just such a good crafting up there. Okay, like for example, there is technically kind of like an element of mystery as you as a viewer. Like you kind of want to see, oh, do they actually succeed at this mission? And there's kind of this
Hmm.
there's a story plot, so like an event plot that's going on. But I think that the true star of this show is kind of this idea of exploration of oh like you know if you were an older person, think back to like when you were younger and like how you would have seen the world differently, right? And like I think that that dynamic constantly is brought up, and I still think, at least for me personally, it's one of the better, I guess, one of the better series I've ever seen where time travel happens and you're really focusing on like the emotions. Like I actually can't think of like another show where like they've like nearly pinpointed and focused on this as much and executed as well. So yeah, that was still quite enjoyable, and I am very bullish on this show per se, I guess, in terms of like the overall trajectory of the show.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think the it was an interesting twist when they revealed Akun and
Yeah.
what happened to, right, I mean, at the end of
Yeah.
the episode he committed
Mm-hmm.
suicide.
Yeah.
And that added a bit of depth as to like, oh, the stuff that he's doing in the past is really gonna change the outcome, right?
Yeah.
At
Mm-hmm.
first, it was just, oh, it's going to be to save, I forgot her name, the girlfriend, the
Yeah.
ex-girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
But now a little part of it's like, oh, how can I also save Akun from what he just did? And
Yeah.
can you save him? And
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the answer is yes. But can now there's that additional baggage that he has to kind of deal with. And I think I agree. The big draw of the show isn't really the whole time travel sequence. It's
Yeah.
the emotional roller coaster that we're going through because this guy who had nothing currently in the present now
Yeah.
has a chance to redeem everything
Yeah.
and has to go through all of those like tribulations and really difficult stuff. And so I think it'll be interesting to see if he does save the people and also
Yeah.
how long this journey is. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if the manga is still going or not because, like,
Yeah. I have
technically
no
speaking,
idea.
he can continue doing this time travel for
Like,
12 years
yeah, exactly.
until
Yeah.
he goes back to where he
Yeah.
first time traveled.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Like technically, you can go all the way there, which would be interesting. But yeah, definitely a show that has my attention. Alrighty, and now we are
so
on
yeah,
to our middle
the
eight.
middle. Do you want to take the first one or me?
All right. I'll take the first one, and we can just alternate.
Cool.
Alrighty. Whoops. So the middle eight. The first one is Yasuke. This is the newcomer. At number 9. Not to give it a score of 6.3. I gave it a score of 5 with a rolling average of 5.65. Yeah, I was pretty excited of the show. To be honest, I think it was mainly because of Lakeith Stanfield's participation in it. I think the premise was a little bit all over the place. Like I was just to provide a little bit of context, I was actually just genuinely kind of confused at the beginning. I was like, what is happening? Because I like knew the premise of Yasuke as like a historical figure, and like even though he wasn't like a full blown samurai, he was still like kind of like a squire, like the equivalent of a squire. And so I was like, oh, okay, they're gonna focus on the historical aspect of it or whatever, but then it's kind of like also partially set in the future, and like it seems a little bit like disjointed at first, but I will say that it is I will fully admit that it seems like it has plenty of potential. And I think that, like for example, like one thing that really did satisfy was the fact that they were willing to explore kind of the fact that he's black and kind of like explore a little bit of that. I mean, it almost sounds like it's like, oh yeah, of course, like Yasuke is only notable because he was like a black guy, right? But I do think that the show didn't waver from it, like, and they kind of just like leaned into it like relatively quickly, and so it makes me think of like just between that, right, like so him being like truly like a black sheep, in terms of like the grand scheme of things, and like like him already being painted as a more, shall I say, more complex character, aka he's not just like a goody two shoes that wants to save everyone. There is a level of reluctance of being him, like like, oh, society doesn't accept me, so why should I participate actively in society? That whole eventually, like him eventually being almost kind of like swayed to like bring the girl on the journey. Yeah, I think for me moving forward, this show, hopefully it starts to bring, I guess, a little bit of the universe's established powers and stuff like that. I'm hoping that they kind of tie the ends together a little bit, because it does feel a little bit ass pulley at times, but I do see plenty of potential on that. And yeah, I mean, for just one episode, like we've already landed us on the top of our middle list, right? So it's it's a decent, it's decent.
Yeah, I just want to add in that I think the music slaps really
Oh
hard.
yeah,
It is so good. Just the background music, the noise, and it's just really refreshing.
Yeah, definitely. Alrighty, and at number 10.
At number 10, we have Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro. Dropped down 2 spots, not in our top 8 anymore. I give it a score of 4.8. You give it a score of 5 for a rolling average of 5.6. The scores this week is much lower than the previous weeks. I'm not sure why you did it, but for sure for me, one of the reasons why I gave it lower scores, I felt very uncomfortable with some of the situations, specifically the fondling. Like I'm like, this doesn't seem real. This is very discomforting, and like it's very hard for me to believe that the main character actually likes Nagatoro, because that's what it's hinting at, right? That but it's like, I think the level of teasing is a little bit too harsh for my taste, and I think it I can't suspend my disbelief in the fact that the MC likes her.
I'm almost gonna almost like whip it around the other side where like okay like I know like please don't quote me out of context, you know, like boys will be boys, like I want to number one make it very clear, like, you know, like there's that phrase is usually supposed to be described, you know, like, oh, boys pouring mayonnaise down like a slide to go faster, like not supposed to be talking about, you know, like more rambunctious activities. But you know, like I can kind of see a little bit where like, you know, like the dude is, you know, into female attention. Like I almost kind of
Mm-hmm.
get that part a little bit. I will say that yeah, I do think that for a level of the level of teasing that she has, I'm almost kind of surprised that she's almost leaning this much vulnerability into it, where it's like, oh, like, you know, like somebody who wants to be like this, like it's like the power dynamic is all about her having a ton of control. And I feel like for this episode in particular, it's like it felt a little bit weird where like the line kind of almost got blurred a little bit without too much earning of it. And it just like, yeah,
Yeah.
it is like, I feel like the score, I'm guessing the score, the common thread to the score dropping down is just because, you know, we are going a little bit too far into um yeah, it's going a little bit too far into the weird, like kind of like unearned, and it's like it's somehow formulaic yet still unearned. I don't know if that like kind of makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, I also think it's just it's been a lot of repetition of the same kind of gags and stuff, and so it's hard for me to believe that. I don't know. I guess I'm less interested because it's the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, this was one of the shows where I originally had a lot of hope for, you know, kind of like it going up and above and beyond, but now it's kind of like, okay, this is the same premise, dragged out a little bit too far, starting to get a little bit stale. Okay, yeah, alrighty. And at number 11, we have Burning Kabaddi. It is dropped down one spot. Manatsu gave it a score of 5.8. I gave it a score of 5 for a rolling average of 5.54.
Yeah, it's your turn. So,
Oh yeah.
what are your thoughts
Yeah.
here?
So I think this is one of the ones where I'll just be honest. The mechanical aspect of what he does, the captain does, right. So this is the captain character, the one on the right, with the, you know, the dark L-esque eyes, the one on the
Yeah.
right of the poster. He ends up being introduced, and it is supposed to kind of be like a shocking thing where it's like, oh, like, you know, everyone else is kind of like, you know, Mister like borderline, like, you know, weightlifter bro as type of vibe, and then now we have, you know, a skinny fast guy that shows up. And I
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
mechanically speaking, it all makes sense. This episode, I think I gave it a lower rating than some of the other episodes, mainly because it like almost felt like too tropey, like anime power tropey, where I was just like, okay, like listen, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I do think that they've done enough like explanation with kind of like, oh, like what he does in terms of like a mechanical perspective,
Yeah,
that at
yeah.
least to me as a layperson, maybe I'm not like, you know, I don't have enough of an understanding, but it seemed believable to me with like a like a decent understanding of like athletics. Like it seemed like, you know, like acceptable. I do think that, you know, if it almost fell into the line of like, I felt like slight like superpower BS is where he's just like, oh, like he has like a certain mode that he turns on and that type of stuff. Like it felt a little bit like over the top, but yeah, I still think that one of the show's continual strong points is the fact that it's talking about kabaddi, which most of us don't know, and kind of just exploring the mechanical dynamics does provide a decent backdrop for other storytelling. And I still think that,
Hmm.
yeah, this show still manages to pull that off.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said.
Yeah. Alrighty.
All right. The first entry that is the same ranking is going to be Super Cub at number 12. I give it a score of 4.8. You give it a score of 5 for a rolling average of 5.29. We all know that Super Cup is a very comfy show. And although in previous weeks we've seen some sort of character development and progress with the main character, this one not as much. It's more of the same.
Yeah.
The animation and sound quality are still solid, but not much character development. We're not sure how the plot progresses, so we're not entirely sure. Like it doesn't excite me as much as it used to, because like okay, motorcycles, that's it.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I think that I agree. I think this was one of the shows where literally, if they didn't have the snippet at the end about how she felt like, I mean, and this, okay, I'll make this perfectly clear. This isn't a new sentiment of her like really
Yeah.
identifying with like the motorcycle and kind of like having that be like a part of her life. I do think that them kind of like circling back to that at the end kind of like redeemed the episode a little bit. Like it went from like a super bad episode to like an okay episode. Yeah, I will say that this is still like it. I get that it's a comfy show and you're not supposed to expect like a crap ton of stuff happening, but this one felt like extra stagnant when it came to like like character progression and that type of stuff. That being said though, like I still think that like like the vibes wise, I still think it does a pretty good job of displaying like this is just it's a young girl in a unknown world trying to navigate. And I feel like that essence of it still really does a decent job and it feels nice. Like, but yeah, I mean, I think outside of kind of like the ending snapshot a little bit where they kind of tie it back to like the episode's themes, there's a reason why this episode kind of got a lower score than the rolling average, like quite notably so. But yeah.
Yeah, I think I just personally find it too slow. Like the whole
Mm-hmm.
sequence of her handing the stuff over from school to school. One,
Yeah.
like just fax it. I don't understand why you just don't fax it or send it via PDF. And then number two, like
Yeah.
why do you have to show us like almost every day her coming back and forth? I thought it took just way too much time.
Yeah, it's like it's somehow okay. Like they covered a lot of time, right? It's like essentially the entire summer, and then it somehow ends up feeling like almost nothing happened.
Yep.
Like just gonna be
Yep.
honest, yeah, it's kind
Exactly.
of one of the things where it's like, like, yeah. All right. Number 13, Farewell, My Dear Kramer, dropped 2 spots. Manatsu gave it a score of 4.5. I gave it a score of 4, and the rolling average is now 5.25. Yeah, I think this was just it's one of those shows where I had a decent amount of optimism for it, where I felt like it had like a little bit more for me personally. I guess mechanic sports mechanics immersion. Like at the very beginning, I was like, okay, this seems like very believable, and they're talking about that, but it's now is regressing to like it's regressing to what I would call extremely slice of life cheesy esque events are kind of like what is now taking place. Like, oh, like these little girls like trying to learn how to cook, and then now they're getting bullied by the boys' coach, and it's just like it becomes very slice of life, and it's like, oh, it's almost like the hopes that I had for the show at the beginning kind of being like, oh yeah, like like it's a pretty decent representation of what playing soccer at a non-professional level is like. It's like, oh, like at first I was like, oh nice, and like now there's just like very little of that. I'm hoping eventually they kind of do like bring it back around, but now it's like it falls very squarely into what I would call like tropey slice of life like type of thing, and it just kind of yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just found it significantly slow as well. Like not much progression that I wanted. Kind of.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons I gave it. So like there wasn't really much that happened personally. It was like it went
No.
back to like a more comfy feel.
Yeah, no, it's just like it's like oh they're like oh we lost a game, dang that sucks, and then like like let's try to boost up our nutrition, and in the end it's like oh no we're getting bullied by boys soccer. It's just like okay like all right,
Yeah.
like it just yeah like not I'm not gonna completely write it off and just say there's not anything left worth watching in the show, but it definitely
Yeah.
kind of has slowed down noticeably. Um, the next
Yeah.
one.
At number 14, we have The Way of the House Husband, who dropped 1 spot. I gave it a score of 4.8. You gave a score of 5 for rolling average 5.23. And my notes for this show is almost
Mm-hmm.
always the same, where it's pretty funny. I think this one wasn't as funny as the previous
Okay.
episode, which is why the score is a little bit lower for me. Character development not really existing. We kind of just
Yeah.
learn more about who this guy is and how he
Yeah.
interacts with the other characters, and that's like the main plot of it all.
Yeah.
This is episode 4. The last episode is next week. So because we haven't, because it's not in the bottom 8, it will
Yeah.
survive the gauntlet.
Okay.
Next week.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really pretty much it. I feel like it's the same review
Yeah.
over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, like like I think that this is kind of like what you have to expect for these type of shows, where it's more like it is kind of just supposed to be like slapstick slash absurdist comedy a little bit, right? It's like that type of humor. Like this is kind of more or less what you should expect. I think that to contrast, I guess if you were to try to compare this to like the Hall of Fame entry in this genre, and mainly being Gintama, like yeah, it's like what he called out. Like there are very few. We have one more episode left, and sure, each episode's like kind of made up of what, 3 mini episodes, but it's like
Four.
or is it
Four.
four, okay, 4 mini episodes? But yeah, it's like just little snippets, and it's I do think that the humor part is pulled off pretty decently. I think it's just pretty much just that though, right? It's like the constant gag of, like, hey, here is a guy that tries to do real life situations and now look very gangster, right? And it's kind of like it's supposed to be funny, right? And that's more or less just kind of what it is, right? Like I think like, like let's say like another show that comes off of mine is kind of like a more like, oh, the premise is supposed to just be funny. Is like, oh, like there's a cartoon where like or there's an anime where Jesus and Buddha are roommates in modern day Japan, and like almost all the jokes are just like, yeah, it's like, oh, like he says something that seems relatively normal, and then like it just comes off with like super psycho or super weird or whatever, and that's supposed to be the humor, right? And that's just kind of like what this is, right? And so it's just kind of like it's a nice episode, but yeah, I mean it's just pretty much what it is. Full Dive. This Ultimate Next Gen Full Dive RPG is even shittier than real life. I think that, yeah. It for me, it felt a little bit disappointing about how, like, for a show that had this much, premise, I think, or coolness about the premise, like the fact that they had to end up resorting to like essentially, oh, here's a beautiful girl and she like literally goes, I'll marry you if you like beat the game or whatever, and that's kind of like what like moves it forward. I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, like it's like it felt like I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with them going into this whole real life dimension to try to give a little bit more context into his development overall as a character. I think that part's fine. I just think that it ended up kind of being like a little bit way over dramatic, and yeah, it's like the fact that this is what they ended up having to resort to felt a little bit disappointing to me. But
Yeah, so I agree with that. I think I didn't need that scene. I was thoroughly convinced. Yeah, convinced may not the right word, but I was okay if the purpose was because of his interaction with his sister.
okay,
Because his sister was complaining how he
yeah.
just gives up on things. And if
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason why he like, okay, fine, I will beat this game. I'm like, okay, yeah, you know what, I'll buy in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it feels just kind of like, oh, hold on a sec. Excuse the technical difficulties real quick. Hold on a sec. Something. Okay. I think we should be back. Okay. One sec. Alrighty. Sorry. Give us 1 second while we iron this out. Don't know what happened with the Zoom. Alrighty. Okay, looks like we're back online for the stream view. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think that, had they, I agree with your statement. I think that had they just stuck with, oh, this is the sister's,
The
like,
sister
yeah,
one,
the
yeah.
sister, it's like, whatever. Like, I feel like it's like, dude, he's a middle school student. You have this, like, I don't know, like, I don't know how old this, like, manager is, but it felt like they had, like, literally threw, like, such, like, crazy cards to, like, get him back in, right? It's like, oh, he literally has to like just completely ruin his IRL interests, like, by like peeing himself, like, like a track meet. It's like, yes, like literally, it's like he's thrown away his biggest IRL interest, and now there's just, like for lack of a more delicate way to say it, it's like literally a big titty goddess is like, yo, I'll marry you, like, come on, and like it's like, okay, this is what gets him back in. It's
I
like,
liked the whole I liked so I gave the score that's my score is a little bit higher than last week's
mm-hmm,
because I enjoyed the character development of the main character in
mm-hmm,
regards to like exploring
Okay.
what he did before, and the whole peeing situation, right? Being embarrassed by that, and
Yeah.
that's reflected in the game because he pees in the dungeon as well, right?
Yeah.
And so bringing those aspects of his past into the game, I like that, and that's the
Okay.
one of the selling points earlier on in this season.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, yeah. We'll continue to see where it goes. It's still solidly in the middle. But yeah.
All right, the last show that is safe from elimination will be Joran, the Princess of Blood and Snow. Goes down one spot at number 16. I give it a score of 4.8. You get a score of 5 for a rolling average of 5.10. I have a lot of mixed feelings about this show.
Yeah.
It's my lowest score of the show in the past 4 weeks, and
Okay.
primarily because, again, a lot of the shows I scored low this week have issues with pacing. We have the
Yeah.
introduction of the brother in the flashback, and then we have the brother at the end, but then he dies.
Yeah.
Then we have
It's slingshotty. Yeah.
one of the pros of last week's episode at the end was the cliffhanger about the betrayal of
Yeah.
one of the. But then he
She.
dis-
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, he decided to betray that person back,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't understand why. Like he crossed her
Yeah.
and then double crossed. I'm like, but why? And I don't think the intention was really, at least for me as a viewer,
Yeah.
the intention wasn't clear.
Yeah.
So I think the pacing is super off, and I
Yeah.
don't understand why Joran was like, okay, I will stay here. Give me the blood. It's like, no,
Yeah.
don't. Let me fight
Yeah.
you now. I'm like, why didn't you just fight earlier?
Yeah, I think there's an element that the show's trying to solve, like, oh, like, humans are emotional, and like I do think that it wasn't executed well enough to where there's a lot of buy-in for me as a viewer. I think that yeah, I mean, it's like you identified, it's like, okay, here's the guy who betrayed, and then he double crosses, and the explanation is supposed to be that this guy wants essentially a world that'll accept him for who he really is instead of just a biological, like, pieces, right? That's kind of like, that was supposed to be like this idea of like, oh, like, the world is a sky, like I can do whatever I want. And then when he realizes that this person at the end is just here to prolong his life, when the Joran's like brother shows up, and I think that's supposed to be the explanation, when he like realizes that, like, oh, like, this is just a guy who's like self-serving off him, so he's not trying to recreate society, he's not trying to write like Japan or whatever.
Selfish.
Yeah, but like, and it's like okay, the fact that I had to kind of think about it a little bit to understand what happened there, like, that shouldn't be there. Like, I think that this is like another one of the shows where, like, it's, if you want to, okay, it's almost sounds kind of contradictory, but kind of just hear me out. Like, if your show wants to be over dramatic, like, I need to be able to understand the drama, like, almost like right away. Like, I think it's like, that's like the difference between
Especially
this and
when
Mars.
it's about to transition into an action scene.
Yeah, right. It's like, I think this is the difference between this show and Mars for me personally, is that, like, okay, like, sure, like, Mars is like pretty hammed up, but at least it's like, oh, like, I understand what I'm supposed to feel like right away. Whereas for this one, it's like, oh yeah, like, you introduce like a brother, and it's supposed to be like this such a big part of Joran, and then like just literally it seems almost like asshole, kind of like, oh, ta-da, here he is. It's like, okay, it's like Chekhov's gun, but like super bad, like it's super bad Chekhov's gun, where
Yeah.
just like, oh, like, of course, like, it's gonna show up, and then like the character just gets like, like, just gets like, booted out like
Stronger all of a
really
sudden.
quickly. Yeah, like stronger, and just like booted all of a sudden. It's like, I still think that this show has an interesting premise going for it, to the point where I'm like, oh, I guess I want to keep watching. But yeah, like, it is, I do think that this, like, execution was definitely fumbled a lot. I think that if your show is going to be like this dramatic, like, you need to make sure that, like, I understand what I'm supposed to feel, like, almost right away, and that was definitely not the case. Like, me being able to explain to you, like, why the guy ended up double crossing, like, that was, I will admit that, like, it took me about like a minute after it happened in the show, and me kind of like thinking about it, to be like, oh, I get it, okay, all right, like, and then it's like that, it shouldn't be like that, at least in my opinion. Alrighty.
Yeah.
And we are now heading to our bottom 8. These are the shows that are in danger of elimination.
Yeah, and I realized, yeah, and the first show, I'm now calling it the creme of the crap, is going
Okay.
to be Godzilla Single Point at number 17. It has not moved.
Mhm.
I gave it a score of 5.8. You gave it a score of 4 for an average of 4.91. So this one was an interesting one for me as a viewer, because
Okay.
I thought it was more of the same the previous
Okay.
weeks, where
Yeah.
it's like nothing too much is happening. A
Mhm.
little bit more, a lot more info
Yeah.
domes.
Okay.
And I think the reason why I scored it so high was I am
Okay.
very amazed by one, the animation. Like
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
getting cleaner and cleaner, and I'm
Okay.
actually not sure if that's purposeful. Like
Okay.
I don't know if this
Interesting.
is like
Okay.
a
Okay.
meta
All
where
right.
it's
Okay.
like they
The things
they
become
purposely.
the situation
Yeah,
becomes clear, and so the picture
yeah,
becomes clear.
because
Okay.
right now,
Yeah.
when I'm rewatching the show, like I look at the first three
Yeah.
episodes, it's a bit more grainy,
Yeah.
and I commented before it's a very grainy
Yeah.
animation. And now when
Yeah.
I looked at it, I was like, wait, why does the animation look smoother and crisper?
Okay.
And so I'm wondering if that's intentional or it's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's just this week's episode.
Yeah.
And I know it might be looking way too into it, but I
Yeah.
enjoyed that aspect of the
Okay.
animations. I'm more thrilled and excited about the concepts of of the
Okay.
content, like the
Okay.
whole particles with
Yeah.
traveling light, and I
Hmm.
forget what they call it.
Yeah. It's I forget
Yeah,
exactly what's called.
it's escaping me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I like that, and the
Okay.
introduction of the random dinosaur at the end, right?
Yeah.
Finally getting some more action. So
Yeah. All right.
that's why I at least gave it a higher score than I usually did.
Yeah, I will say that my frustration from it came from like it seemingly like, just from a storytelling perspective, is just more of like, oh, like, here's some stuff that's supposed to be really cool. I still feel like the emotional buy-in's not quite there. I will say that
Agreed.
mechanically speaking, like it is kind of interesting now to see like, them like dive literally down to the atomic level of like what's going on, and I think that was kind of cool. But yeah, I think for me, there's a frustration of kind of just being like, dude, like holy crap, like if it okay, like we already all know it's literally gonna be Godzilla at the end, right? It's like this story has been told so many times, so it's like you don't need to go too hard onto the mechanics. And like I would much rather like see a show about like emotions and kind of like how people were like the humanity of the situation, right? Like I think that
Yeah.
I guess to reference some of the big anime, I guess, like Hall of Famers, like Gantz, like a show where it's about like, essentially this world just like flying into this crazy chaos. It's like, yeah, like sure, there's a decent amount of shock value and kind of like, oh, what's happening, but like a lot of the focus is like how humanity gets like tested to the limit. It's like I want you to explore more of the characters if you're going to give me like a tropey ass scenario, right? And I'm a little bit frustrated by just kind of like how, like I said, like it's just a continual mechanical focus. I will give it credit and say that the mechanical focus seems to be pretty good, and yeah, like it's interesting.
No, I
but,
agree. Like if
yeah.
we were to drop the show, I wouldn't feel bad about it because
Yeah.
I'm not emotionally invested in the two main characters at all.
Yeah, exactly. All right. The next one is Higehiro at number 18. Minatsu gave it a score of 5.8. I gave it a score of 5, and the rolling average is 4.91. I think this episode was. I was a bit frustrated. I think that it went from last episode where I felt like, okay, sure, it didn't necessarily escape the tropes 100%, but it felt like it provided like a very deep angle to like a deep viewing lens into what we would normally call a trope. And I felt like this episode, like it like reverted like crazy essentially, where it's just like, oh, like the manager's like, oh, I've actually just wanted you all along, like, take me. And it's like, and then like, the girls like they revisit the theme of like, oh, like I'm gonna get kicked out at the end. It's like, haha, guess what? He wants to meet you. It's like I felt like it's like it lacked kind of, okay, like the all the things that like made me just like really hype it up last episode, like kind of missing again. That being said, its score is still much higher than it's still higher than its rolling average, because I do think that like from a plot progression standpoint, it's still decent, and it keeps me kind of like, it's like, okay, yeah, I do kind of want to see what happens next, and it's not bad, I think, on that front.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought the really, I don't know. I think there's a couple of shows here that did the same thing, but the whole conversation with Goto and her rejecting him in the first place, it's always like,
Yeah.
I don't really buy into the idea that people will turn down someone even though they like them. And so I knocked down a few points with that, because it's like, and it's not the only show that's done that, right?
Oh yeah, we're about to this is gonna be more of that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean the only other comments here, like, so he's definitely a coder of some sort, because when I was looking,
Yeah,
at his,
he has. It looked like
he had VS Code
yeah.
turned on and some sort of project management. So I was
Yeah.
like, hey, at least they have that.
Have that little detail down there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
All
plus
right.
points for that.
Number 19.
Yeah, so at number 19 we have Let's Make a Mug 2. It rose 4 spots up. I gave it a score of 6.3. You gave it a score of 5. I thought about this really hard about what kind of score to give it, because it doesn't do anything. I want to say it doesn't do anything extraordinary,
Okay.
but I thought this week's episode was solid in animation,
Okay.
and that's some like I thought it was
Yeah.
solid in character development,
Okay.
especially
Mhm.
the ending.
Yeah.
I thought it was gonna be a very boring episode, and for the most part, it was until the
Yeah.
ending, where it was like
Oh, she has a
she
reason. Yeah.
she was disappointed that her father didn't fully enjoy the gift.
Yeah.
Because the father said like, "Oh, you made this. Oh, this is
Yeah.
great,"
Yeah.
but that wasn't enough for her because she knows like,
The
oh,
other.
he didn't have the reaction that the
Yeah.
other god had.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that kind of depth when it comes to like, okay, she actually realized it's not what he says, it's what he really means. And so he's like, okay, I have to get better because it's one thing. It's one thing to appreciate something
Yeah.
that like a loved one has given you as a gift,
Yeah.
but it's another depth to appreciate something that you actually really enjoy. And I actually like the fact that they're exploring that now. And so
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's really nice. And so I had to debate to myself, is that moment enough for me to bump the score up a little bit?
Okay,
And
yeah.
ultimately I said yes.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I had the same thing, except I think my starting point was a little bit lower because I was just like really frustrated. I was like, Jesus, it's like,
Yeah.
it's like for comfiness, it's like okay, like come on, like it's like it didn't even feel like that. Like the comfy payout didn't even feel as high as let's say like Super Cub or the one where like he adopts a kitty. Like there isn't like that much like comfy level even of payoff. But then the end, I was like, oh, this is really surprising for a show that from my understanding, seemingly it's supposed to be targeted towards a little bit more younger people. The fact that like they were able to capture the nuance of essentially like personal drive and stuff like that, I was like, okay, all right, that's what ended up giving me a score high enough to bump it like above the rolling average was because of that. So yeah. Number 20, Osumake. This is probably the drop down 4 spots. This is probably the biggest gap in our scores potentially.
I believe you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, I can go check as you.
Okay.
Your
Yeah,
thoughts about
but
this episode.
I'm asking you a score of 5.8. I give it a score of 3. The rolling average is 5. I am just very disappointed. I was so frustrated about how the seeming like just like went right back to the harem like trope and kind of just like sat there. And the part that pissed me off the most was like, oh, like, hey, guess what? She has amnesia now. So like just to like up the complication, I was like, yo, come on. Like, what is this? Like, it's okay. I don't know. I feel like it's one of those shows where at the very beginning you didn't really sell me on the idea of this guy as being like an incredibly attractive person. Okay, like this is kind of like okay. Let me put it like this. Like, there are some shows where you establish it right at the beginning where you're like, oh, clearly this person's going to get a lot of attention. Let's see how he deals with it, right? No, they paint him as this kind of this like everyday person. And then there's a twist later where it's like, oh, he used to be a childhood actor. And then all of a sudden now, like I said, it's like, okay, like you have the top girl, you have like the middle girl who like gets amnesia. Like I'm really hoping that's just a gag in the next episode. Like, and it's just like, oh, like guess what? She doesn't actually have amnesia because if she does, I feel like it's like the most laziest storytelling possible. It's like, okay, you finally layer some emotional / like relationship complexity to the story. You're gonna erase it just for like more like harem potential. It's like, okay, come on guys, like I don't know, like I was just really frustrated by it. And then like and then the last one just like it's like out of left field. Here comes like another childhood actor connection that's just like even more aggressive about it. And it's just I don't know, like it felt really frustratingly tropey that I felt like it wasn't there before. And yeah, I just felt kind of frustrated watching it.
Yeah, so I do agree. I'm not so sold on the third character.
Yeah.
Like I understand having an attachment to your mentor.
Yeah.
That guides you. I think the part that I kind of throw off is like how much power she has. So like
yeah.
to go
Get
into
his house
place,
and shit like that,
being
yeah.
barged into school just to talk to him, and the fact that he keeps on consistently and constantly addressing the main character as Oni-chan really like annoys me. Like, you can say like once or twice, then I'll get it. I understand the affection, but like every single sentence or address she makes to him always starts with Oni-chan. Like that makes no sense.
Yeah.
So that part is what I didn't like about this week. And this is the show that I was talking about earlier.
Ooh,
in this
the
podcast
suspension.
About a
Okay.
lens.
Yeah.
No, about a lens. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think because I don't know why I didn't have this lens in the previous couple of episodes. In the beginning of this episode, I watched this lens as a trashy anime.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Tropes as a fun way to advance the plot, and I was like, this is a very funny and entertaining show when you put that with that lens on. Like the whole funny,
Okay.
the whole address of like her, like them interacting with each other with all the things, and
Okay.
everyone watching this thing. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that's really funny. She has amnesia at the end. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. Which is very different from you because
Okay.
I'm seeing in the lens of a trope. I'm like, that's funny that she has amnesia.
Okay.
Also. I don't even care where it came from,
Okay.
because we'll discover about that next week.
Yeah.
But the fact they introduced this as a cliffhanger, I thought was hilarious.
Okay. I felt like it was okay. If you okay, I see where you're coming from. I think the reason why I didn't get that lens right away was because I didn't also get that tone in the first 3 episodes. Like they tried really hard to make it like super
agree.
serious. Yeah, and so for me it was just like a whiplash of just kind of like, oh come on, like what the hell? Like don't get me wrong, if this show continues, okay, and it just continues to become, shall I say, almost like almost a self-aware trope poking funny at that, I am actually a really big fan of that type of stuff. So I will give it like a decent score, but I think the whiplash just felt like really unearned, and I was just like, okay, like yeah, like I agree with you where it's like, oh, if I'm able to put on the lens and just purely view it as like, okay, here's like a trashy ass, like a trashy show, and then like, oh, like literally it's like as tropey gets, like it's almost funny because of how tropey it is, and yes, like I agree with you, there is definitely some quality there. I think for me it was just like a frustration of like, you built this show up to try to make it like, oh, also serious for the first 3 episodes, and all of a sudden just like whiplash out of nowhere. I'm just like, okay, this seems kind of dumb.
Because the ending of last week's episode makes it appear that the show is a very nuanced story about first loves in high school. I was like, okay, cool. And this episode, I was like, nah, it's actually not about that. We're trying to add as much tropes as possible. Injected in the show.
So I think the self-awareness factor of it will be very important for going for it, just to see if like, like if it's something that I end up enjoying. Like did they actually purposely pull it off? Like, Konosuba-esque, or is it going to be like a Battle Angels? Is that what it's called? I think whatever. A Combatants Will Be Dispatched. Or it will be a Combatants Will Be Dispatched type of scenario where it's like, no, like this is just stupid. Like, so, yeah.
I agree. Okay, at number 21, it is To Your Eternity. Also the same spot as last week. I gave it a score of 5.2. You gave it a score of 5 for a rolling average of 4.84. So we both have increased our score for the show. I enjoyed... and this is the same, not the same way as Odd Taxi did.
Okay.
The focus of this episode was not wasn't at the main character, right? It was the side characters here, and what they are doing. And I kind of enjoyed that. I liked more character development for the minor characters, because I think a cast where the minor characters actually have some like depth into it is definitely a good sign of the show for the show.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed the character development for the female character. I enjoyed more of the progression of where the story is ending. I mean, heading.
Okay.
Because I thought the first couple of weeks were too slow.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're finally picking up the pace gets me excited for the show.
Yeah. I think that this is one of those ones where I think like it's. I give it a decent score, because I give it a pass on essentially kind of like almost world building a little bit, context building. Like I think that like we finally start to get to see a little bit more of like what is this world that they're in versus kind of this new society that they're in. You get a little bit more like insight into the older sisters, kind of like vibes and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of context blocks that are being placed, and so I kind of give it a pass for kind of like I guess being like relatively a bit more plot wise, not advancing too much. There's definitely a decent amount of stuff that happens, but like I think like in terms of plot, it's just like they visit a city, they get captured, now they're trying to get out. But like but it's like, but I give it a pass because they did spend that time to kind of world build a little bit better, which I do think that this show in general lacked a lot, especially for a show that's supposed to be about the novelty of a sphere going into a new world. Like it's like you need to give me more about the world, right? And so I think that this episode still did that, and so give it a decent score. Alrighty, Pretty Boy Detective Club. At number 22.
Number 22, still the same. I gave it a score of 5.8. You gave it a score of 4 for rolling average 4.73. So you can go first since you scored it lower.
Yeah. I felt like okay. I felt like this almost kind of like a little bit regressed past the last episode to now this episode once again. It's kind of like, here's like a big bunch of like crazy things that are happening, and at the final like the end, the twist is just like, oh, I see somebody standing behind him, and like I felt like the show, like it was really dragged out for not a lot of stuff happening. Which, to be fair, I get that this Monogatari s type of show. There isn't supposed to be too much stuff that's happening, but I felt like what the last episode brought, even though I felt like it was really cheesy, was this idea of like, oh, like, you know, like a more, I can't necessarily call it philosophical, but it is kind of like a treatise that you kind of like think about a little bit more. I felt like this episode just like completely lacked that, and it was just like a really really long, a roundabout way of saying we went to a casino and somebody's cheating, and it felt like it was just like
Yeah, and that's just very what's the name of the author? I think Nisioin.
okay,
It's a palindrome.
okay,
That's I think the style, because the same things you are talking about with this episode is what you talked about during the first episode. The beginning of the first arc.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, pretty much it's gonna be a lot of the same kind of stories where it's like this. Premise is really dragged out for a couple of first episodes, and you have a big reveal at the end, and it'll take a couple of arcs until we actually get to like a meaty part.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. So
the
I mean,
question then becomes is like, are you willing to?
Continue to invest in it. Yeah, and that's I think that's a fair assumption. I think that this one, I will admit that there is a level of relativity when I rate episodes, because you know the most fresh episode is the one that you just watched, right? And so some like you will kind of like think about the previous episode, and I felt like for this one is just kind of like, yeah, once again, I hearing your explanation, it makes sense. Like thinking about the first arc, like, you know, like it's like, who knows, like most likely maybe I'm gonna give it low and then decent like again, like that might be the pattern, like that happens again. So yeah, we'll see. The Saints' magic powers omnipotent. This one dropped 5 spots. And that's to give a score of 4.2, which is apparently the lowest score that you've given. I gave it a score of 4 for a rolling average of 4.71. I am going to toss up some shade and say I don't understand people who like think that there's like worthwhile substance in this show. Oh my gosh, the level of just like emotional randomness / like just like it's like so all over the place. Like you have this person who's, number one, okay, let's talk about it from a plot perspective. Nothing really has actually meaningfully advanced. She literally goes, was even this episode like, I have a donkey friend, and like it's just like, and it's like, oh, like essentially like, oh, like nothing really happens until the very very end. And I'm gonna critique that very very ending scene, where I understand she's supposed to be the saint, right? But it's like the fact that you tied the thing so strongly, in my opinion, with the emotional aspect of her just being like, oh my god, these people are so poor, like I need to help them, and like you emphasize that part of it so much in terms of kind of like the emotional build up and the eventual happening of her performing like an AoE heal. I'm just like, dude, like what is this? Just like, it's just such like, oh, like it's like, okay, to give credit where credit is due, at least it's not a dude just running around like adding scores of chicks to his harem. Like at least it's not that, but like this is slightly gender flipped, like where it's just kind of like, oh, like here's a girl who's like, you know, because she's a loving, caring woman, and like she's bringing her, you know, like her emotional delicacy to the world, and that's like what's happening, and it's just like, it's bloom, and look how beautiful it is. Like I feel like it is kind of like the other side of that coin, and it's just kind of like, dude, like come on guys, like what is this? Like,
yeah, so I think the show started with an amazing premise.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that turned me off from this show is how incredibly dense the main character is.
Yeah.
She's supposed to be OP, right, with her healing powers, and we finally get to see that in this episode. But she's dense about her interactions with the male characters. Yeah. She's dense about how her powers are working. Mm-hmm. And I just can't. I'm not motivated enough to support her and what she's doing, because I feel like sometimes she just does random things and it just works out for her perfectly. And then this emotional experience happens, and because of this emotional experience, something powerful has happened, and because of that, we feel for her. I'm like, hell
Yeah,
no.
it's like hell no. Yeah, like I said, like I feel like this is just the exact opposite side of the coin of dude adds like Kirito adds like 20,000 chicks to his harem. Like this is the opposite
Yeah,
side. This is the opposite side of that coin where it's like, oh, here's a girl. She's just so pure, right? It's like they keep on trying to sell the idea of like she's so clumsy and pure, emotionally pure, and she's just this, like this like innocent, like amazing person. And like yeah, it's like through the power of her emotions that this thing just goes. It is just kind of like, dude, like please, like stop, man. Like what is this? Like it just feels like it's so unearned, and it's like yeah, like I feel like it's
yeah,
just the
yeah.
exact opposite side of the coin of like the
And
isekai tropiness. Yeah, like
one of my like complaints that I've had with
yeah,
the show in previous weeks as well is it still does a lot of like these animation scenes of like, oh, look up to the sky and make a noise, or as a way to interact, just go with
yeah, yeah,
you pan to her and she goes, and
yeah.
the guy goes, I'm like, okay, no one does that in real life, right?
Yeah.
No one communicates like
Yeah,
that, but
yeah,
for whatever reasons, animes love to use that as a way for characters to talk to each other, but it
yeah.
just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it just feels, it's like I said, it's like it's cheesiness just on the other side of the coin, but it's like another isekai that seemingly is just hammed up on the cheesiness. Alrighty, the next one,
All right.
backflipped.
Yep, number 24. It is our lowest ranked anime this week. Dropped 5 spots. It has earned both of our lowest scores. I give it a 4.2. You give it a 3 for a rolling average of 4.53. You may begin since you gave it lowest score.
Yeah. This is truly, I think this is probably the biggest fall from grace I think we've had on it. Okay, at least of the shows that are remaining. This is one of the larger fall from graces. Man, okay. The previous episode already kind of warned me that this show was just gonna be like, oh, look at how kawaii this dude is, or like how cute these boys are, and just kind of like do like a little bait on that, and it's just like I said, like just like like oh, like cute boy baits, like that's just it already kind of warned me about that. Man, okay, can you tell me with a straight face what happened in this episode and try to make it engaging? Like, cause like it's just like, dude, like what the hell, man? Like it's just
What did I write my notes? I wrote in my notes. First of all, why did they skip Shirohai's practice scene? Right?
Yeah.
They were talking about it, how it's so amazing, and then they did not animate it at all. And we're supposed to believe that it was amazing.
yeah.
Then another thing I wrote here is like the team was having a conversation on the road, and they did not recognize that the Shirohai members were right there with them. I'm like, how do you not? How are you in the middle of a dirt road?
Yeah.
Athletes, by the way.
Yeah.
Feel the presence of 6 big muscular people walking by you. Like, there's just so many things I have to suspend my disbelief that just does not make sense.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's like, so there's that, right? Like these are all the tiny kind of things that make you as a viewer not be able to really buy into it. And it's just like, okay, so first of all, you already have like a very low level of buy-in, and then secondly, like I said, it's like, oh, we are practicing, and oh, surprise, we are not as good as a team that's been together for a really long time, but we are competitors. And it's just like, dude, like holy, like it's like, okay, like everything that's bad about sports animes was in this episode, and then like I said, just like so little substance, so much bait. It's just like, yeah, it just felt like it was just, oh man, like just so frustrating to watch, absolutely frustrating to watch.
Yeah, and then animation's still not solid.
Yeah, it's like
CG.
It's like, okay, like at the very least, it's like the Sisters problem, right? Where it's like, okay, if this is gonna be a show about action, like please show me some action. You can't just skip that like, oh, amazing practice scene or whatever. Like it's like at the very least, like show me that, right? If it's supposed to be a sports anime, like show me a little bit about that. It's like, nope, like that's just gone. And like the mechanics of the sports, like, okay, sure, I'm not like a master gymnast, but like some of the problems that you brought up earlier, it's like, okay, this is what a layperson can identify, right? It's like how the hell did they not know? It's like it just seems like so just out of place. And yeah, it's like the cheesiness of just like sports anime. It's like it just condensed like so hard in this episode, and it just becomes so much more obvious because once again, it's like there's just no substance, right? It's like, oh, like, hey, it's like, okay, like when they find out that they have commonalities with people, it's like, dude, like, Jesus, like, don't force this down my throat. It's like, oh, this one guy's like this amazing, he's like, oh, like, look at this superstar, I'm a super fan, right? and then somebody else is like, oh, I'm a super fan too, emotional connection. It's like, dude, get that shit out of here. It's like, what in the world? Like, it's
not earned at all.
Yeah, like, it's just completely not earned. Like, yeah, it's just, I just, I think it is no surprise that it earned the lowest score for both of us. Like just straight up because man was that some trash. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
And so that concludes our list for this week. And we have our drop list here. We have Godzilla Singular Point. We have Hirahigo. We have Let's Make a Mug 2. We have Osamake. We have To Your Eternity. Pretty Boy Detective Club. The Saints Magical Power. Omnipotent Powers. Sorry. The Saints Magic Powers Omnipotent and
Mm-hmm.
Backflip. And we each got to drop one show, and I go first since we
All
are
right.
in week 4. And let me get ready for all this next slide that I have to update. It will come to no surprise that the show that I will be dropping. Okay, I have to think about this if I want to game it or not. I'm not gonna game it. I'm just gonna give it
Okay.
to the worst, and
Okay.
it has to be Backflip.
Yeah. That.
Backflip had potential. I gave it a bit
Yeah.
of doubt a little bit earlier on,
Yeah.
but it has lost my everything really.
Yeah. It has lost everything. On mine, I'm going to drop the Saints Power. I think that every
Alright.
single other show in here has something that I still want to look forward to. For the Godzilla one, it is doing a pretty decent mechanical, I guess, like world building mechanics is doing a decent job of that. Do kind of want to see where that goes. Higehiro, like I said, like it's gone significantly better from where it started, and so I kind of want to continue to see that. The Let's Make a Mug, was kind of almost like this is like a shining star episode. And so yeah, I mean, seeing something that good, it makes me not want to drop it right away. For what is the childhood actor one called? Osamake.
Osamake.
Yeah, Osamake. I have decided not to elect to drop that one because I do want to kind of see if this ends up being kind of like a self-ironic, like self-aware, ironic
No, I hope
level
so
thing or
too,
not.
'cause
Yeah, it's just like I will now after hearing that perspective, I do kind of want to see if they just end up leaning on that and it's just supposed to be like a comedy series. If it is, I actually do kind of like that type of stuff, so we'll see on that one. Yeah, like to your eternity, it's like okay, like I feel like the world building is definitely getting up there. I am very well aware of Pretty Boys Detective Club, how like at least for me, seemingly like it's going to be like kind of meh. Okay, that was decent. Meh. Okay, that was decent. So I kind of still have some hope for that. The Saints Magic Power, I feel like I don't need to watch anymore to eventually figure out, hey, eventually it's gonna be, oh no, it's gonna be troublesome because she's actually the saint and then she's gonna get a big bunch of unwanted attention. It's gonna be like an episode. It's like, oh no, like where do I put my kindness to? Is it loyalty, whatever? Eventually, it's gonna be like a reverse harem scenario. It's like, oh, there's all these cute boys. I don't know what to do with them. Blah blah. It's like, I feel like it's just like, okay, like I've seen enough. I've seen enough of the violation of like just the other side of the Isuke trope coin, like over and over and over again, to where I just don't have faith in it anymore. And I'm just like, nope,
Yeah.
like I don't
I
want
think
this
that's
anymore.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm gonna.
Alright, so if you can
Yeah.
refresh
Let's
that.
see. Okay, and let's see. Did it work?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So at this point, we have 22 shows remaining from this gauntlet. Anything here that's grayed out means it has been eliminated from the gauntlet. Still, I mean, a good decent amount of shows that we have. I think from the sound of it, we still have shows that we're willing. Oh wait, actually, before all of this,
Okay.
we still have our saves. I will not be electing to use my save. Will you?
I will not be electing to use my save.
All right, thank goodness. There's still some shows here that I think we're willing to drop. It sounds like, and so I
Yeah.
don't think we're gonna be using our save anytime soon. But we're only 1/3 now officially in the way,
Yeah.
and I think we still have. Once we get rid of those shows that we want to drop, then it'll get a little bit more difficult in terms of dropping them.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and yeah, hopefully as the gauntlet continues to get thinner and thinner, it does gives a little bit more time to be able to really delve into some of the nice details and kind of like talk about what really hyped us a lot, and kind of, or like what really frustrated us. But yeah, I mean, overall, I'd still give this season, like, it seems like it's doing quite
Pretty
decently.
strong.
I mean, yeah. Yeah, you know, there was some chaff that we had to get rid of. You know, there's a lot of shows on here where I'm just like, I would not have been happy to continue to watch it. But
Hmm.
after getting rid of the chaff, there's some pretty good quality around here. And yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to continuing to watch a lot of these. Yeah.
Yeah, if you go on to the next slide, it'll just
Alrighty.
show the remaining schedule. Tonight we dropped two, and we will now be watching 24 shows. Oh, sorry, no. Is that what we did just now? Yeah, we watched
Yeah.
24 shows.
Mm-hmm.
We're dropping two, and so for next week we'll have 22 episodes that we'll be talking about.
Alrighty.
Uh, Again, perks remaining. Each of us have a save each. If you want to support us, go ahead and do that. You can support us by going onto our Patreon, which is just patreon.com/the anime podcast. Help us, give us suggestions and whatnot, and have a little bit of a voting power in terms of
Yeah.
content that we kind of want to produce in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of rearrange the tiers too, so it's a bit more affordable and a bit includes more perks.
Yeah.
And we also have a Discord community that we're trying to start up. So if you're interested in joining the anime community for our Discord, it is, well, we don't have the tier 3 boost, so we can't have a fancy URL, but you can grab this code and join us then.
Yeah.
And I'll link it actually to the bottom of the Twitch after this
Yes.
podcast.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. Yeah. Well, that is going to be it for week 4 of the anime podcast. Yeah, some good stuff. Hopefully, you know, can't wait to watch the next season of it, the next episode of it, and yeah, just continue going down the gauntlet for this season. I think that, you know, just by virtue of the gauntlet format, you know, we have some quality stuff remaining now, and so, you know, it's definitely feels a lot less of a chore now as we kind of progress further and further in.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Alrighty.
So yeah,
Well,
we'll see you all next week.
alrighty. Peace.